follow the video game industry at all, then you are unfortunately very used to being lied to by early demos and marketing from publishers. But sometimes a miracle happens. Sometimes a game's marketing is misleading in its favour. And while these situations can still cause the occasional controversy, there's no doubt that the games on this list under-promised and over-delivered. I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and these are the 8 best the marketing was a lie video game reveals. Number 8. Spec Ops The Line. Until The Line, the Spec Ops brand was a forgettable series of third-person military shooters. Initially a realistic tactical combat sim, the series became tailored more towards the mainstream as it changed publishing hands and platforms. Migrating from the PC to the PlayStation, the series became a much more generic shooter. When Call of Duty came along with its level of polish and accessibility, it was pretty much over for the Spec Ops games. 10 years passed by until The Line was announced, and its marketing intentionally reminded us that there was nothing special about Spec Ops. This strategy was a gambit. By selling the game as another generic shooter set in the Middle East, a sandstorm-ravaged Dubai specifically, they set themselves up to subvert expectations. Nobody expected to find themselves playing a psychological thriller adapted from the likes of Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse Now. Other than a base-level war is hell story, the real story of the game was a meta-narrative about our own relationship with violent media, especially video games. No one would have ever expected a Spec Ops title to inspire countless think pieces and even a book of critical analysis and deconstruction. Number 7. Max Payne. Developed by Remedy Entertainment and published by Rockstar Games, Max Payne is ostensibly a hard-boiled detective story about a renegade DEA agent taking revenge on the people responsible for the deaths of his family. There's a fair bit of the Matrix thrown in too, in the form of bullet time slow motion, as was the style at the time. The game's marketing leaned heavily on its John Woo presents The Punisher style story and action sequences. And don't get us wrong, it looked awesome and it turned out to be awesome, but that was just the surface. After being dosed with the narcotic Valkyr, a powerful hallucinogen that causes violent, terror-fueled trips, Max succumbs to his own personal blood-soaked hell. As he wanders a warped version of his former home, he recalls the deaths of his wife and daughter in the most gruesome and traumatic ways possible. It also causes him to question his reality as the hallucination breaks the fourth wall, revealing to Max that he is in fact a video game character. Remedy would go on to iterate on these sorts of sequences in subsequent games Alan Wake and Control, which play out almost entirely like Valkyr hallucinations. Number 6. Bugsnax. Sony making Young Horse's Bugsnax one of the premier PS5 games certainly felt like a choice at the time. All that power of a new console, and one of our first introductions to it was this cartoon game about hunting Pokemon-esque bugs. It didn't look bad necessarily, but it was obviously no God of War Ragnarok. The marketing for Bugsnax didn't tell us much about it at all. We got a trailer and some screenshots showing off some of the game's fundamental elements, like catching and eating the titular food-shaped mini-beasts, and how eating these bugs morphs your body into various foods like strawberries and curly fries. But that was seemingly all you did, and many people thought it looked like a game for babies. Until you consider the implications of that trailer, that the lovable inhabitants of this land, the Grumpuses, turn into the food that they eat. So does this mean... Yes. Yes, it does. The Bugsnax were Grumpuses who turned into living food. This is a colourful cartoon game about cannibalism. Number 5. Braid. Jonathan Blow's Braid was such a turning point in game design that it's hard to remember how little we expected of it prior to its release. Seemingly just a colourful 2D platformer, Braid wore its derivative inspirations on its sleeve, making the first level a full-blown reference to Super Mario Bros. Throw in some simple time travel mechanics and what you get is a solid, fun platformer. Early accolades and ads made it clear that Braid was, if nothing else, a very well-made game, but there was no reason for anyone to expect the multi-layered meta-narrative that we got. Braid is essentially a commentary on the most fundamental hero myth there is, rescuing a princess. However, by the end of the game, it's clear that you're not rescuing the princess, but chasing her. Now, while that's a clever spin on the formula that, let's face it, turns the mirror against a lot of gamers, it's also a metaphor for the atomic bomb. Protagonist Tim chases the princess as mankind chased the power of the atom so that we could control it. And that obsessive hunt for control was also itself a metaphor for toxic relationships. It's little surprise now that what appears to be at first a cheery 2D platformer turned into one of the most important indie games of all time. Number 4. Final Fantasy VI. It took a long time for publishers to figure out how to sell JRPGs in the West. The very fact that Final Fantasies 4 and 6 were brought to the West as 2 and 3 is proof of that. That's 3 entire games they figured weren't worth their time or money to export internationally. internationally. In fact, when Final Fantasy VII was announced, every gaming magazine had to have a couple of paragraphs explaining how we made this 3-game jump. But the way Final Fantasy VI was advertised was downright confusing. Since mascot platforming games were popular at the time, Square Enix, then Squaresoft, made the bizarre decision to put the character Mog front and centre. While it makes sense for the ads to draw kids in by introducing them to the debut of these soon-to-be popular Moogles, it ignores the fact that Mog is a totally missable hidden character with almost zero significance to the plot. Fortunately, Final Fantasy VI is one of the best entries in the series with a calibre of storytelling that was unparalleled for its time, but you never would have known it from the ads. Number 3. Fallout New Vegas. When Bethesda gave some of Fallout's original developers the chance to make their own follow-up to Fallout 3, they delivered in a big way with New Vegas, arguably the best game in the series. Unfortunately, that wasn't evident based on the marketing. Inspired by Fallout 3's announcement trailer, the New Vegas ads focused a little bit on atmosphere and a lot of bit on explosions. Not only did this make it unclear that New Vegas was as much a new full Fallout game that it could have just as easily been Fallout 4, it also almost exclusively showed off the Bethesda Fallout game's weakest element, its quality as a first-person shooter. By this point, Fallout 3 had already been a hit despite its serviceable FPS mechanics. Everything else about it was enthusiastically well received, especially its turn-based inspired VATS combat mechanic. All the same, the game has much more emphasis on classic role-playing and story than combat, but you'd never know based on how it was pitched to its consumers. Number 2. Final Fantasy VII Remake. Final Fantasy VII fans had been positively howling for a remake since the PlayStation 2 came out. So when Sony and Square Enix announced that it was finally happening, we all went a little nuts. After seeing the short but cinematic trailer, we all had questions about how its mechanics would be modernised. But for the most part, fans assumed it would be a fairly straightforward remake. The marketing right up to release relied on nostalgia, showing a bunch of famous and familiar scenes and gameplay sequences totally overhauled for the PS4 and PS5. What we didn't expect to get was a pseudo Final Fantasy VII 2. Final Fantasy VII Remake turned out to be almost more of a sequel. It's mostly faithful to the original until it really isn't, and we find out that through some sort of time travel multiverse adjacent shenanigans, it was in a much more literal sense a total remake. Square Enix remade the game from scratch rather than recreating the original, making it a whole new game built on a familiar premise. And number 1, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. The Dynasty Warriors games are known mainly for two things: mashing buttons against a staggering number of enemies and spin-off games. The announcement of the original Hyrule Warriors, a Legend of Zelda themed spin-off, came as a bit of surprise though, as Nintendo is protective of its properties. Fortunately, Hyrule Warriors was pretty fun, but like most Dynasty Warriors games, it was heavy on action and light on story and really anything else. When Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity was announced as a prequel to Breath of the Wild, it actually made sense. In Breath of the Wild, we see flashbacks and remains of massive battlefields swarming with Ganon's minions. If you're going to make a Zelda game about war, then this would be the one. But we were treated to a lot more than just another Hyrule Warriors. Instead, Age of Calamity was an entirely fresh take on the Warriors formula that incorporated familiar Zelda mechanics such as puzzle solving and the use of numerous tools. The story even went into more detail than we got from Breath of the Wild, showing us how alliances and character relationships were formed. Plus, you get to drive Breath of the Wild's divine beasts as giant mecha. Can't really beat that, can you? And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this video down in the comments below, and of course which of these video game bait and switches you liked the most. There must be some more out there. Let us know what else would fit into this list, and of course make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Head over to whatculture.com for more content every day. I've been Si for WhatCulture, and have a good week.